Hey guys, tonight, we travel deep into the sands of ancient Egypt, not the shiny pharaoh bits you might expect, but somewhere a little stickier. You'll be following the trail of one of the ancient world's most luxurious products, perfume. And yes, it starts with donkey fat. You probably won't survive the smell. You're trudging along a dusty footpath in the Nile Delta, early morning haze, drifting over muddy banks and reed-thick canals. Insects hum lazily. A donkey brays nearby, sharp, nasal, insistent, and then another joins in, because why scream alone? You round a bend and come upon a little village that smells oddly rich, not bad, not good, just intense. Hints of something floral, yes, but also warm, fat, hot clay, and what you hope is incense. Welcome to the birthplace of ancient Egyptian perfume. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time. It is always fun to see who's listening at 2 a.m. in Finland. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander deeper into the village, sandals kicking up fine sand, and start to notice how many donkeys there are. Not just for hauling bricks or grain, these beasts are oddly well kept, their coats brushed, even oiled. Turns out this place is a hub of animal husbandry, but not in the way you'd think. These aren't pack animals, they're perfume producers. Well, sort of. Their fat, once rendered, is the base for the most prized unguents in the land. The smell really hits you as you pass a row of small stone enclosures, half-stable, half-open-air kitchen. Here, villagers are slowly boiling bits of donkey fat in wide copper pans over low fires, skimming off impurities with wooden paddles. Steam rises with a scent that's meaty, a little sweet, and extremely not Chanel. Historians still argue whether donkey fat was chosen for symbolic reasons, ease of sourcing, or simple practicality. It was plentiful and softened well when mixed with resins. Some texts mention beef or goose fat, but donkey remains the frontrunner both in physical finds and temple murals. Imagine that murals of perfumers stirring lard like potion masters, all under the approving gaze of gods with ibis heads. You're offered a small wooden spoon to sniff, risky, but you're brave. The rendered fat isn't disgusting exactly. It's dense, clean, and oddly comforting, like old-fashioned soap or a melted candle. It's also sticky enough to hold on to scent for days, which is the real point. One older artisan explains, with much gesturing and a few interpretive sniffs, how they carefully choose which donkeys yield the best fat. Apparently, older animals are out. Too strong smelling. Young, well-fed donkeys give the mildest base. You nod like you understand, then take 3 discreet steps back. A child runs past you, trailing a clump of papyrus dipped in perfumed oil, playing maybe or helping to test a batch. You follow her to a small courtyard where crushed flowers, resin beads, and bundles of cinnamon bark lie drying in the sun. Each ingredient has been carefully sourced: myrrh from punt cassia, from Nubia, and lotus flowers from the very canals you walked past. Quirky fact: ancient Egyptians didn't just apply perfume, they baked it into cone-shaped pastes worn atop the head. The heat of the sun would melt the cone slowly, letting the scent drift down your face and neck. It's less splash on elegance and more scented candle in slow collapse. But in a world without deodorant, it worked. You pass a row of young men mashing blue lotus petals with a stone pestle, mixing them into a paste with the cooled fat. Blue lotus has mild narcotic properties. It calms, soothes, maybe even sedates. Smell wise, earthy sweet with a whisper of pond mud. They hum as they work. The vibe is less factory and more spa if your spa came with livestock. You sit for a while in the shade of a fig tree. From here, the whole scene has a rhythm. Fat boiling petals, crushed jars lined in rows, lids fitted with linen and beeswax seals. It's not glamorous, but it's sacred. Perfume isn't just for parties, it's for ceremonies, gods, lovers, and death. Every scent carries memory. Every batch takes weeks to prepare. And despite the clunky raw materials, these people are proud, rightly so. Egypt's perfumes were famous across the ancient world. You can almost imagine a Greek merchant sniffing the air from his boat and thinking, "Ah yes, donkey fat season." You hear a donkey snort behind you and turn to find one nosing at a pot of half-finished resin paste. It looks guiltily smug. You gently shoo it away, deciding that maybe, just maybe, you'll never smell incense the same way again. The heat thickens as you make your way toward the temple district, if you can call it that. It's less grand pyramid and more organized chaos, sun-baked courtyards, mud brick workshops, and long shadows where cats lounge like miniature gods. You're here to see where the grease becomes gold, figuratively speaking. The donkey fat you met earlier now gets its makeover in a series of low-roofed perfumery houses hidden away behind the main temple wall. The first thing you notice is the quiet. This is serious business. You peek through a half-curtained doorway and see 3 perfumers, all with shaved heads and long linen aprons, working in synchronized, almost meditative silence. One stirs a large clay basin with slow, methodical turns of a paddle. Another grinds frankincense resin with a circular stone grinder. The third is carefully adding something dark and sticky from a copper ladle. The scent in here, unbelievable. Sweet, smoky, spicy, and under it all, a buttery warmth that's oddly comforting, like a cinnamon bun left in a sauna. You step closer, careful not to knock over anything sacred. Because in this room, even a misplaced lotus petal could throw off weeks of preparation. Ancient Egyptian perfumery wasn't a casual affair. It was ritualized, formulaic, and guarded like a family secret. Historians still argue whether some recipes were state-kept knowledge or just passed through guilds like underground poetry. Either way, outsiders weren't supposed to see much. But you're lucky today. A younger assistant motions for you to approach. She shows you a small tablet covered in faint, looping hieratic script, a recipe apparently. You can't read it, but the images alongside help fat a flame. A jar, a stalk of papyrus, something that looks suspiciously like cinnamon bark, and a few ambiguous blobs that could be resin or raisins. No one's sure. Modern reconstructions of these recipes have had mixed results. One French archaeologist ended up with what she politely described as spiced mutton jelly. Another managed a solid perfume that, according to testers, was shockingly pleasant once you got past the animal base. Your guide laughed softly as if to say, yes, some things are better left forgotten. A row of fired clay perfume pots sits drying on a low shelf. Each is sealed with linen dipped in beeswax, stamped with a tiny scarab emblem for authenticity. They smell faintly of cinnamon and benzoin, an ancient tree resin used not just for scent, but for its antibacterial properties. That's right, your perfume also fights germs. Imagine rubbing a cinnamon fat mix on your armpits and thinking, ah yes, medicinal luxury. And it wasn't just about scent. Perfumes were considered offerings to the gods. You've heard the phrase pleasing aroma in religious texts. The ancient Egyptians lived that. Perfumed oils were applied to statues of deities, smeared on temple altars, and poured into burial chambers. If it smelled nice, it must be sacred, or at least polite. You're invited to help stir one of the mixtures. The paddle's heavier than it looks, and the paste inside glops reluctantly. You catch a whiff of something floral and resinous blue lotus and sweet myrrh, maybe. The texture is thick and a little gritty. One of the perfumers gently corrects your stirring direction. Clockwise. Always clockwise. Apparently, the direction invokes Ma'at, order, harmony, balance. You nod solemnly, trying not to elbow the pot. Quirky fact for you. One preserved jar of ancient Egyptian perfume discovered in a Theban tomb still retained a faint aroma after over 3,000 years. Scientists describe the scent as leathery sweet and slightly terry. So, not Chanel No. 5, but honestly, not bad for something older than the Roman Empire. As you move through the perfumery, you notice small baskets of strange ingredients, crushed pine needles, dried calamus root, even a jar of what looks like crocodile scales. A perfumer notices your confusion and grins. Not for scent, he explains with a wave of his hand. For symbolism. You nod like that clears everything up. Historians still debate whether these ingredient lists were more functional or magical. Some included things with no smell at all, ground gold, for example, presumably to reflect divine light or to confer status rather than scent. Others used bitter herbs to ward off spirits or aphrodisiacs with names so polite you'd never guess their purpose. You pause beside a window overlooking the alleyway. Below, a line of servants waits to carry sealed jars to the temple proper. One drops his bundle and the entire queue groans. Another day, another jar of donkey-based divinity delayed. You smile. Some things really never change. You step back into the mixing room and realize how dizzyingly complex this whole operation is. It's chemistry, yes, but also theology, medicine, magic, and art. And all of it rides on that humble, fatty foundation rendered from a braying desert animal you'd probably never want to meet twice. As you're about to leave, the youngest apprentice presses a tiny glob of finished perfume into your palm. It's warm from the sun, smooth, and smells no joke amazing. Earthy floral, faintly spicy. You dab a bit behind your ears like a local. Congratulations. You now smell like a high priest in 1450 BCE. You carry the scent with you, faint but persistent, as you wander away from the temple district. Past rows of vendors shouting prices in ancient Egyptian, past a woman weaving papyrus baskets by the canal, past a cluster of lazy cats pretending not to stalk the occasional ibis. Your nose itches faintly from all the incense, but the smell in your hand, still there, still oddly comforting, like a memory you didn't know you had. You duck into a shaded side street and step into what looks like another perfumery, but here the mood is less sacred, more practical. No gold leaf seals, no sacred paddles, just rows of long clay benches, stone mixing tools, and bundles of drying herbs hanging from the beams. This is where the perfume gets mixed for everyday use, for households, for street vendors, maybe even for tomb robbers hoping to cover the stink of guilt. A worker waves you over with purple-stained hands. He's been grinding something with a giant stone mortar. Turns out it's crushed iris root dried and then soaked in vinegar to bring out its scent. He adds a splash of that into a bowl of pre-rendered fat donkey, obviously, and stirs with the back of a palm frond. The air smells sharply floral now, with a trace of something sour and ancient, like old paper or forgotten corners of a linen closet. You're in what might be called the lab of the ancient world, a cozy chaos of textures and smells, brick ovens, carved wooden molds for shaping solid perfumes, little spoons, so many spoons. This is where combinations get tested, some successful, others not so much. Historians still argue whether some of the more bizarre ingredients had a practical scent function or were purely symbolic. Like the inclusion of juniper ash, mildly fragrant, yes, but also used in rituals of cleansing. Or the occasional splash of beer, which some recipes called for, possibly to ferment the mix slightly and help open the scent. Beer perfume. You're not sure how you feel about that. Probably depends on the pub. As you watch, one of the perfumers begins preparing a batch of kaifi, a famous Egyptian incense that was also worn as a paste or soaked in oil. He works in layers: wine raisins, honey resin, myrrh, cinnamon, juniper. You realize with some unease that the smell reminds you of a holiday fruitcake left too long in a warm drawer. Sticky sweet, a little fermented, but comforting. You help shape a few conical incense pellets with your fingers. They look like gumdrops rolled in ash. You set them gently in a bowl and watch as they're slowly dried over a fireless clay dome heated from below. The process is slow, careful, and full of whispered jokes among the workers. One says something in ancient Egyptian that clearly makes the others laugh. You don't get the words, but the tone, classic workplace sarcasm. Probably a joke about the smell. One perfumer turns and explains that every batch must be rested for days before use. Apparently, freshly mixed pastes are considered too harsh. They need time to mellow, age, become soft. There's an art to knowing when a paste has ripened. Some go by smell, others by texture. One old man insists you can tell by sound the squishiness of the stir. You nod solemnly, pretending to hear the difference. You do not. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Ancient Egyptians had a concept called senetjer, meaning to make divine or to deify, and it often involved smell. Scents weren't just pleasant, they were sacred transformative. When you anointed yourself with perfume, you weren't just getting fancy, you were aligning yourself with the gods. You were becoming, in a sense, a little more divine. That's why the ingredients were so carefully chosen. Myrrh for devotion, frankincense for clarity, lotus for love or maybe sleep, and yes, even donkey fat for durability, warmth, and that inexplicable softness that modern lotions still try to copy. Animal fats, despite their origins, bind scent better than most oils. Even today, some niche perfumers use rendered fat just, from less shouty animals. You notice something else here: gender roles. Women and men both work in this space, and the roles don't seem sharply divided. Some women prepare floral ingredients, yes, but others stir the resin pots and manage the ovens. One woman in particular seems to run the whole operation, barking orders, checking consistency, sniffing samples with the intense focus of a master chef. Historians still debate whether perfume making was an elite profession or a domestic one. In temple contexts, it seems formal, even sacred. But in neighborhoods like this, it feels like a family business passed down hands on more sweat than scripture. Some even suggest women had more influence in perfumery than in other trades, an aromatic loophole in the usual patriarchal norms. A few apprentices begin pouring mixtures into little conical molds, perfume cones just like the kind worn on shaved heads during ceremonies or parties. Once dried, the cones are placed on the crown of the head and allowed to melt slowly in the sun, perfuming the hair, skin, and yes, the linen garments as well. Practical, questionable. Fabulous, absolutely. You're handed one of the warm, not quite set cones to hold. It wobbles slightly, still soft. It smells like sugar cinnamon and something you can't place. Not donkey fat, you hope. You imagine attending a royal banquet with one of these perched on your head, melting down your back as the sun sets behind the lotus pond. Sweat, spice, and subtle status all in one fragrant cone. The perfumer beside you gives a small smile and says something soft, probably a joke about tourists. You laugh anyway. Then he mimes placing the cone on his head, eyes wide with mock solemnity, and strikes a pose like a statue. Everyone cracks up. You do too. It hits you again how weirdly human this all is. Even 3,000 years ago, people fussed about how they smelled, about impressing each other, about rituals, attraction, and comfort. And they did it with fat flowers and fire. You step outside into the dusk light cone in hand, and the breeze lifts the scent toward the canals. Somewhere a donkey brays. The sun is starting to slip lower on the horizon, now painting the Nile in long ribbons of gold and rose. You follow the scent trail, still thick on your fingers and warm in the crook of your arm, toward a quieter part of the town, a cluster of houses and gardens that once belonged to middle-class artisans, scribes, and doctors. If the temple was the cathedral of perfume, this neighborhood is its kitchen pantry. Your sandals crunch along the dirt path beside a narrow irrigation channel where water-lifting shayduffs creak rhythmically and frogs chirp like tiny percussionists. You spot a small courtyard garden no bigger than a classroom, but filled with potted herbs and flowering shrubs, marjoram, blue lotus, mint, and a small patch of sweet rush grass. Here, the scent is different. Less perfumed, more alive. The sharp green of mint, the powdery hush of iris, leaves the peppery snap of fresh calamus root. This is where raw ingredients are nurtured, not for sale, not for export, but for home use. You're seeing perfume at its most domestic. A woman in a simple linen tunic stained with resin and garden dirt invites you into her home. No grand altar here. Just a shaded porch with woven mats, a few mixing pots, and 2 clay jars labeled with symbols you recognize now, one for fat, one for sweet oil. She's preparing a basic household salve, something between a perfume and a healing balm. Her recipe includes donkey fat, crushed peppermint honey, and a pinch of powdered myrrh. You watch her work. She grinds each ingredient with a pestle, then warms the mixture gently over a brazier. The scent rises slowly, cool, sweet, tinged with smoke. She dips a strip of linen into the mixture and wraps it carefully around her wrist, tying it like a scent bracelet. Keeps the flies off, she says with a wink. Here's the everyday side of ancient Egyptian scent bug repellents: foot balms, scented cloths tucked under headscarves to disguise less glamorous smells. Let's be real. Plumbing was minimal, and the Nile, while beautiful, didn't always smell like roses. Fragrance was part of daily hygiene, not just luxury. You're handed a small clay pot and shown how to prepare a batch yourself. The fat is already softened. She's heated it earlier in the day and let it cool just enough. You add a spoonful of dried mint, a dab of resin, and a few crushed petals from a pink lotus. As you stir, the mixture grows cloudy, then begins to shimmer slightly as the oils release into the fat. It's messy. It's strangely satisfying. Quirky detail time. Ancient Egyptians used scent not just for attraction, but also for mood. Feeling anxious, try blue lotus and honey. Feeling sluggish, maybe cinnamon and papyrus oil. Suffering from evil air, better go with frankincense and vinegar. Scent was diagnostic, a kind of ancient aromatherapy. Historians still argue whether certain combinations were grounded in pharmacology or just ritual. Some of the plant ingredients do have mild calming effects. Others might have simply smelled clean in a world where clean was mostly defined by what didn't reek of fish. As you sit on the mat rubbing the balm between your palms, the woman's daughter brings out a tray with a bowl of cooled beer, some salted dates, and what looks like a perfumed loaf of bread baked with coriander and soaked in sweet oil. You take a bite. It's dense, fragrant, and strangely satisfying, like chewing on an herbal footnote. Another smell drifts in the neighbor's oven, baking something smoky and spicy. You ask what it is. The woman shrugs. "Funeral cakes," she says matter-of-factly. "He's baking them for a burial tomorrow." You pause mid-bite. She laughs. "Don't worry, they're for the living. The dead get the nice oils." That's another thing about ancient Egyptian scent culture. Death was a major motivator. Oils and perfumes were essential to mummification. The richer the deceased, the more elaborate the mix. Some mummies have been found with over 20 different oils used in their wrappings. You begin to understand why donkey fat was in such high demand. You're not just smelling good for yourself, you're prepping your soul for eternity. You lean back on the mat and look out across the rooftops. Smoke curls lazily upward from other households, and the sky is now streaked with violet. You can just make out the distant call of a reed flute being played somewhere near the river. The air cools slightly, and the smells shift less sharp, more mellow. Everything smells like the end of a long, fragrant day. Your host offers you a small cone of solid balm, carefully wrapped in a scrap of linen. "For dreaming," she says, nodding toward a small statue of Bes, the dwarf god of sleep and protection, carved into the lintel above her door. You tuck the balm into your satchel, the scent lingering on your fingertips like a secret. It's remarkable, really. You came here to learn about ancient perfume and donkey fat, and instead you've found a world where scent is woven into every part of life, where gardens grow purposefully aromatic, where children are dabbed with cinnamon to protect them from spirits, where sweat is managed not with shame, but with resin and honey and a shrug, and where the line between sacred and silly is often drawn with a fragrant finger. You leave the courtyard with a final wave and step back into the narrowing street. Dusk has deepened, and the world feels wrapped in velvet. Somewhere a cat meows. Somewhere else a donkey brays, as if reminding you who the unsung hero of today truly was. The last of the sunlight is gone now, and the street lamps, small ceramic bowls with flickering flax wicks, glow like sleepy fireflies. You walk with slower steps, not just from tired legs, but because the air is thicker, calmer, almost syrupy with heat and scent. You're not in the noisy market anymore. You've entered the quieter districts where the elite sleep in multi-room homes with private gardens, and if they're lucky, live in servants who know just how much lotus oil to warm before bed. Your feet guide you toward one of these grander residences, a physician's house according to the carved reed symbol above the lintel. You're met by a house steward who ushers you through a colonnaded hallway, the walls painted with scenes of papyrus hunting birds in flight, and gods offering bundles of perfume cones to noblemen. In the background, the soft clink of ceramic, the whisper of reeds brushing against windows. Inside, the scent is subtler, more refined. You're beginning to distinguish types now. There's less resin here, more floral softness with a trace of something nutty, perhaps moringa or sesame oil. The steward smiles and leads you into a private study where a physician in a pristine white kilt is mixing what looks suspiciously like face cream. Turns out it is. He's crafting a mixture for one of his wealthier clients, something to prevent the creases of age. He says not even pretending it's for a health reason. The base donkey fat again, of course, but whipped with almond oil, beeswax, and crushed melon seeds. The scent is delicate, almost non-existent. Luxury here means understated. And it's not just vanity. Ancient Egyptian medicine relied heavily on scented salves, poultices, and inhalants. Got a headache? Try a compress of warm fat and juniper. Chest tightness. Rub your torso with camphor-infused oil and chant a hymn to Thoth, feeling spiritually off-kilter. Maybe it's time for a cleansing incense bath followed by a sniff of kaifi before bed. You sit quietly as the physician demonstrates a technique using a flat-bone spatula to apply a scented paste to the forehead and temples in slow, deliberate strokes. You're handed a smaller spatula and a bowl of your own filled with a balm that smells like roses and rain-soaked clay. You apply it cautiously, feeling immediately cooler, calmer, even a little ridiculous. Here's a fun little historical nugget. Wealthier Egyptians didn't just wear perfume, they stored it like treasure. Special scent jars made of alabaster obsidian and even lapis lazuli were passed down generations. The richer the jar, the more important the smell. Some tombs contain entire chests of sealed perfume bottles, still fragrant after thousands of years. Somewhere in a museum, someone's sniffing 3,000-year-old donkey fat and taking notes. Historians still debate whether this obsession with scent was practical, spiritual, or both. Some argue it was linked to cleanliness rituals mandated by temple attendants. Others suggest it was a way to display piety. After all, the gods were said to breathe the offerings of incense and oil. Then there's the aesthetic angle. Smelling pleasant was well pleasant. But there's also a deep-rooted belief in scent as moral alignment. Smell good, be good. Smell bad, suspicious. Fragrant skin meant a fragrant soul. You can imagine the social awkwardness when someone's cone melted faster than expected. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to smell that holy. You're shown the household's scent cabinet shelves of tiny jars, many labeled with symbols that now look familiar. Lotus frankincense, cinnamon papyrus, and more obscure entries like desert resin and Nubian root. One has a picture of a crocodile next to it. You wisely do not ask. As the physician explains his stockpile, you notice a small figure of Taweret, the pregnant hippo goddess of protection, perched next to the jars. He tells you that scented oils were used heavily during childbirth to anoint the mother to calm her nerves, even to bless the cord. Some midwives believed a certain blend of donkey fat and palm resin could soften the passage of life. You wince involuntarily, but nod. That's dedication. Quirkier, still ancient scent prescriptions often came with spells or poems. One preserved papyrus includes instructions for an anti-aging perfume, followed by a line that reads, "Let this keep you as fresh as the lotus and young as the sunrise." It's the ancient world's version of luxury branding, complete with poetic copywriting. The physician, satisfied with your interest and your surprisingly graceful spatula skills, gives you a tiny jar to keep. For sleep, he says. It smells like dusk. You unstopper it briefly. It smells of sweetgrass clay and something you can't name, something like ancient memory. You're escorted out into the garden, which is already lit with oil lamps set along the pond's edge. The frogs have begun their evening chorus, and a servant fans the air slowly with a broad feather fan soaked in lotus water. You sit by the water's edge, watching the tiny ripples catch the lamplight. A servant approaches and places a small flat stone beside you. On it rests a tiny wax cone infused with myrrh and cinnamon, already beginning to soften in the night's warmth. You close your eyes as the scent reaches your nose, heavier now, richer and undeniably grounding. You realize sitting there with scented sweat on your skin and donkey fat balm on your forehead that you have become the very essence of an ancient Egyptian evening. Somewhere between the sacred and the sensual, between the mystical and the mundane, you are fully immersed in a culture where scent is not an accessory but a way of being. A breeze stirs the reeds. A night heron squawks softly from across the pond. The air carries your perfume away in invisible spirals. For just a moment, you imagine a priest in the future kneeling beside your mummy, catching the faintest whiff of this exact moment, and smiling. You leave the physician's villa with your little jar tucked safely under your arm, the night deepening into a luxurious velvet sky scattered with indifferent stars. The streets are emptier now. The clay houses are sealed against insects and spirits alike. Torches sputter in their wall brackets, casting shadows that ripple like water across faded murals and reed basket stacks. You pass a shrine built into the wall, a recess sheltering a painted image of Hathor, goddess of beauty and scent. A small bowl of crushed lotus petals sits at her feet, already half dried by the wind. You're beginning to realize just how much ancient Egyptian life was scented not in bursts, but as a constant low hum part, sacred duty part, lifestyle part, olfactory coping mechanism. You follow your nose again, this time toward the riverside. Here, another smell takes over, rich, smoky, sweet, and unmistakably ceremonial. You've stumbled upon a small temple outpost where a trio of priests and one slightly disinterested scribe are preparing offerings for the gods. Not for public show, this is private ritual, the kind that takes place daily at dusk, whether anyone's watching or not. You approach slowly, respectfully. No one shoos you away. You're handed a small bundle of kaifi, yes, the kaifi, the legendary compound incense used for centuries in Egyptian temples. It's a humble ball of what looks like sticky granola rolled in resin dust, but it smells astonishing. Wine, honey, frankincense, juniper, raisins, myrrh, and something like scorched apple peel. A priest places it on a hot coal in a bronze dish, and the air fills with dense, curling smoke. It doesn't rise, it loiters heavy and velvet, like winding its way into your sinuses and brainstem. You feel your breath slow. You understand in an instant why they used this stuff in sleep temples. Because yes, sleep temples were real. Part spiritual retreat, part early spa. These sanctuaries were where the sick or troubled came to dream, seeking healing visions sent by the gods. Visitors would lie on linen mats, rubbed down in scented oils as kefai smoke curled upward, and priests chanted nearby. Whether you left cured or just pleasantly dazed probably depended on the priest and how well your donkey fat balm was blended. You're invited to sit and watch. The priestess leading the rite has a voice like pouring sand. She describes each offering bread loaves, shaped like fish jugs of beer garlands of blue lotus, as if reading a grocery list for deities. Then she lifts a narrow-necked jar and anoints the altar with a thick amber liquid. The smell of cinnamon floods the air. It's mixed with donkey fat again. Even the gods expected their offerings rich and fragrant. The ritual proceeds in low, murmuring cadence. You're not expected to understand the exact words. The atmosphere speaks for itself, weighty, precise, strangely domestic. One god gets cinnamon, another gets mint, and the hawk-headed fellow near the incense tray gets something sharp and citrusy, which might be horseradish oil. Divine tastes, it seems, vary as much as human ones. One priest during a lull tells you in a whisper that kefi recipes were closely guarded, passed down like family secrets. Some included over 30 ingredients. Some involved weeks of aging. Historians still argue whether all the variants were true kefi or regional knockoffs. He shrugs. They all smell divine, he says, and tosses another pinch onto the coal. Now the conversation shifts to scent's role in divine identity. Gods weren't just visual, they had smells. Bastet was said to smell like warm myrrh and cat fur. Osiris earth after rain and the sweet rot of grain. Set predictably was more peppery and sharp. Smell for ancient Egyptians was a way to know the sacred. A god who didn't smell like anything suspicious. You're handed a ceremonial cloth to tie around your shoulders, pre-scented with cedar oil and crushed clove. To keep the bad spirits off, someone jokes, although their eyes flick toward the darkness beyond the firelight. You tie it dutifully, noting how the fabric seems to trap warmth and scent both like a hug you can't quite shake off. Then someone starts humming, and it's not a song so much as a tone, low, repetitive, designed to lull. The humming, the incense, the thick air, it all wraps around you like a weighted blanket. Your eyes begin to close. You snap them open, embarrassed, but the priest nods approvingly. Good. It's working. And really, it is. This is a culture that understood how scent could cross from utility into mystery. You weren't just perfuming your body, you were scenting your soul, preparing it, shaping it, cleansing it. A balm wasn't just for cracked heels, it was for warding off chaos, for aligning with Mayat, the principle of order and harmony. Scent was law. Smell, right live right. Quirk of history. Ancient Egyptian priests shaved their entire bodies not just for cleanliness, but because body hair trapped scent. You'd be shocked how seriously they took olfactory hygiene. According to one scroll, an improperly scented priest could invalidate a ritual. That's right, one whiff of yesterday's onions and your ceremony was toast. You stay until the ritual winds down the kefi, dwindling into a puddle of hardened resin and ash. A priest gently extinguishes the coals, and someone passes around date wine. It smells like molasses and leather. You sip cautiously. It tastes exactly like the end of a long, fragrant day. As you rise to leave, your robe clings softly to your skin, carrying cedar clove and smoke. The air outside is cool now. The Nile glints nearby, quiet and eternal. Somewhere a crocodile splashes, and you remember that even they were sacred, once offered perfumes and prayers by fishermen hoping to stay uneaten. You walk back along the riverbank, your path lit by moonlight and memory. You are a little greasy, a lot sleepy, and you smell like an entire altar's worth of offerings. In this moment, you understand the ancient obsession. Scent wasn't just about smelling good, it was about becoming part of something bigger, blending into the divine, becoming unforgettable. And honestly, you're fine with that. By the time you make it back to your little mud brick lodging near the edge of the artisan district, your feet are dusty, your arms sticky with sandalwood residue, and your jar of donkey fat perfume is still miraculously intact. It rests like a sacred relic in your satchel, quietly radiating that peculiar, pungent sweetness, animal floral, and slightly nutty. You might be imagining it, but the jar almost feels warm, like it remembers the fire it was born from. You ease open the reed mat at your doorway and step inside. The room is simple: a pallet of woven linen, a water jar, a shelf carved into the wall holding 2 clay amulets, and a rather judgmental cat. He sniffs the air as you enter and sneezes twice. You're not offended. Honestly, you might be flammable at this point. As you set down your jar and remove the aromatic cloth from your shoulders, your thoughts turn to what all this perfumed fuss meant to the ancients. It wasn't just about masking body odor or impressing dinner guests, although yes, those were important perks. It was about aligning yourself with something eternal. Each scent was symbolic. Frankincense was the breath of the gods. Myrrh was healing and protection. Cinnamon meant luxury, foreign trade, even spiritual clarity. And donkey fat. Well, that was the base, literally and figuratively. It was what grounded all those divine ingredients, let them cling to your skin, carry into temples, linger in tombs. No fat, no fragrance. No fragrance, no favor from the gods. Simple as that. You settle onto the mat body, buzzing gently with leftover temple smoke and sesame oil. Somewhere in the walls, a gecko chirps, and you wonder what he thinks of your scent, hopefully approving. Now about that donkey fat. You might be curious, why not just use something nicer, olive oil, for instance, or almond? Well, historians still argue about it. Some believe donkey fat had symbolic value. The donkey, humble yet vital, was tied to agricultural success and rural steadiness. Others say it was just abundant, easy to render, and held scent exceptionally well without turning rancid too quickly in the heat. There's even a third camp that thinks it wasn't really donkey fat at all, but a term lost in translation, maybe even referring to a plant-based emulsion. Whatever the truth, Egyptian perfume makers stuck with it. They even had grades fat from younger donkeys was considered smoother, less pungent. High-end shops filtered and clarified the fat sometimes through linen, sometimes through burnt limestone powder to remove any lingering meatiness. You imagine that step was particularly important for love potions. You smell like beef jerky wasn't likely to win many hearts. You can't help but admire the audacity. These were people who didn't flinch at combining crushed beetles, fish brine, and donkey sweat into something they'd dab behind their ears. And somehow it worked. Cleopatra herself was said to trail clouds of incense and perfume enough to announce her arrival before she entered the room. Ships she rode in were scented, even the sails. She understood the art. A smell could become your signature, your legend. Tonight your signature is somewhere between ritual-ready and cooked poultry, but you carry it with pride. You glance at your little perfume jar on the shelf, and suddenly its journey unfolds before you, like a scroll from a raw donkey trudging through the fields to a vat of bubbling tallow to a vessel of gold leaf and scent. It's oddly touching. Nothing wasted. Everything transformed. A final fact rolls through your mind as sleep begins to nuzzle behind your ears. Archaeologists have found traces of ancient Egyptian perfume clinging to tomb wrappings over 3,000 years old. Still detectable. Still sweet. In a way, those long-dead perfumers achieved what every influencer dreams of: scented immortality. You stretch. The linen mat crackles. Your hair smells faintly of juniper and your hands carry notes of lavender and soot. The donkey fat balm on your wrist has mellowed now, softening into something almost edible. You lick your lips by accident and get a flash of cardamom. Not terrible. It's humbling, really, to think that amid war, empire, drought, and dynastic drama, someone still stood beside a clay stove, pouring warm fat into a jar, adding just the right amount of blue lotus. Someone still cared whether they smelled like heaven or just a well-fed camel. Someone believed that scent could shape fate. And lying here now scented and soothed, you believe it too. As the smoke from the temple drifts further into memory, your body becomes heavy in the best way, like clay after the potter's hands have left it shaped and resting. Each breath feels rounder, slower, like the lingering echo of Kaifi incense in a cool stone corridor. Outside, the Nile murmurs against its banks, whispering the same lullaby it has offered for thousands of years. The stars wheel silently overhead, disinterested but not unkind. And that ancient perfume still clinging faintly to your wrist becomes a thread pulling you gently downward, into softness, into darkness, into dreams. Your mind may wander to golden temples, to donkeys napping in shade, to jars sealed with beeswax and prayers. But you don't need to hold on to any of it. The scents will keep watch. The gods of sleep have been well fed tonight, and they owe you a favor. Let your limbs loosen. Let your thoughts unravel like linen strips from a resting mummy. You are safe, you are scented, you are enough. And with that, good night.